Chapter 391, There's Something About Esm. Let's go, Esm. Ray took her hand and drew her close to him as he flew away from the scene. With his spatial skill, he could have easily teleported the two of them out of there, but instead, he chose to ascend to the skies with her. They both floated in the air, the ground far beneath their feet. What about Aldert? What will happen to him? And them? A single glance at Esm's face showed that, despite being hurt by the elves, she still cared about them. Ray didn't understand if it was some kind of racial camaraderie, but he found it odd. Would I have been the same if the humans treated me like shit? He wasn't sure, but he doubted it. Even when he was considered the weakest of the otherworlders, and he sort of still was, the Royal Council didn't treat him with any kind of bigotry. The only reason they separated the students into two classes was in order not to rush the training of the lesser skilled students and also to prevent the impediment of the growth of the more talented students. It was a pragmatic approach, and Ray wasn't even the only one who was in beta class. Most of the students were there. Promotions and demotions also existed, so it wasn't a strict hierarchy. There were initially 9 students in the Alpha class, but they eventually got whittled down to 7. If Trisha continued her intense training, Ray had a feeling that she would have undoubtedly reached Alpha class. All of that was in the past now, but the bottom line was that he wasn't harshly treated by the humans in H-Tray. Luciel and Brutus as well as any other trainer in between were pretty fair to him. He was treated pretty much the same as everyone else. In fact, most of the scorn he received was from his fellow otherworlders. A lot of them made fun of him in the beginning, but that didn't last very long. Everyone had their own thing, and so they soon ignored him. No one really bullied him. Perhaps that was due to the influence of Adonis, but Ray also felt like they simply had their struggles and challenges to keep busy. I haven't really had it that rough, so I wouldn't know how you feel right now. Esm. Ray said as he looked at her. For a moment, they stared at each other in silence. Then. It's fine, Ray. They don't want to have anything to do with me, and I understand that. Esm spoke calmly. Ray thought she would cry or display some kind of emotion, but her slightly stoic demeanor was not within his expectations. I also don't want to have anything to do with them. I see. Ray chuckled in slight embarrassment. It seemed like, rather than Esm, he was the one who took things too seriously. Thanks for having my back, though. I really appreciate it, Ray. She smiled, slightly using her fist to bump him on his shoulder. Geez. It's no big deal. Ray rubbed his shoulder as he muttered the words. Of course, he didn't feel any discomfort from her action. It was the opposite, actually. He was blushing underneath the mask, so thankful that she couldn't see his beet red face. You're a good friend, Ray. I'm lucky to have known someone like you. Ray felt something move in his heart as she said those words. He felt a bittersweet sensation within him as he heard those words. Friends, huh? I guess. We are friends. I still remember the first time we met. In that dark room. Esm's voice was soft and sullen, but it wasn't sad at all. She smiled despite bringing up the terrifying event. I had to strain my voice to call your name, you know? I said nothing initially, since I thought you would save everyone. Imagine my shock when you just started walking away with those two. Haha. I was going to report to the authorities, and they would have rescued you. Ray responded with a nervous smile as he watched Esm shake her head. That's not what I thought back then, though. I was like, This jerk is just going to leave the rest of us like this? I can't believe he has a good alignment, that sort of thing. Well, I won't deny being a jerk. Ray laughed even harder. Yeah. You made a fragile girl like me struggle just so you could save me. Despite saying that, Esm's smile only grew broader. Who would have thought that jerk would end up being such an amazing friend? The two stared at each other for what felt like a minute, allowing the winds to blow on them as they shared the silence. You're not half bad yourself. Ray finally spoke up, replying in a playful tone. Esm giggled the moment she heard that. Well, isn't it very rare to have such a pretty friend like me? You can show me off to your other friends, you know. Ray didn't have a lot of friends, so only one image really came to mind once Esm said what she said. Alicia. He gulped the moment he thought about what would happen if he tried to show Esm off to her. What will she say, I wonder? The right answer would have been that Alicia was going to be happy for him. Making another friend was not an easy task for Ray, so naturally speaking she would be glad to see him bonding with someone else. But that didn't work out last time, with Trisha. Somehow, the thought of introducing any female as his friend gave Ray goosebumps when he imagined Alicia's reaction. That means she likes me, right? Maybe I can ask Esm about that. Don't look so dull, Ray. Esm's voice brought Ray back to reality. If it's for your sake, I can pretend to be your girl so you can look cool. Huh. I understand, Ray. My friends also made me feel a bit jealous when they had boyfriends and I had none. Yeah? Esm didn't have guys fawning for her. Impossible. Ray's thoughts echoed. But wait. You have a girl, right? Ah, yes. The one you got the amber ring for. I almost forgot about Tha. She's not my girlfriend. Yet. Esm completed Ray's sentence and winked at him. Yet. Ray muttered, laughing at himself as he scratched his head in embarrassment. Esm really caught him off guard with all of this. But, Ray didn't mind it at all. In fact, he quite enjoyed every moment. Can you tell me who she is? This girl that my friend is so in love with? Esm nudged, raising her brows a few times so Ray could spill. It was so funny that he wanted to laugh, but he swallowed it instantly. Well, you've met her before. I have? Hold on. Was it one of the two people you saved back then? Yes. I couldn't properly see their faces since it was dark, and I was weak. Esm began rubbing her chin as she thought back to the incident. Then, a wide smile formed on her face. I see. Well, I look forward to seeing where this goes. Ray nodded and replied with equal fervor. Me too. Asterisk. 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 Thanks for reading. I guess this officially places Esm in the friend zone. Haha. Alicia and Joyce are having a feast right now. I quite enjoy their interactions, though. Chapter 392, Ray's Outcry. Ray and Esm flew side by side, enjoying the brilliant sight that only they could see thanks to their high altitude. Esm didn't have any flight-based skill, but her skill allowed her to freely manipulate the elements around her. Since the winds constituted that, she had no problem freely navigating her way through the air. When Ray asked her how she was able to fly so easily, she responded, I was floating for most of my time in those 2 weeks of solitude. Learned a bit about my new abilities too. Ray was certain that Esm learned a lot more than just a bit, but he decided not to push it any further. You have immense potential, Esm. He could only say. Maybe even more than those elves we saw. Ray noticed that Esm's smile only deepened. She didn't argue, so he knew she must have also checked their status windows. From the looks of things, they get 10 stat points from every level up. That's incredibly broken. Compared to humans, elves were on another level. Of course, someone like Adonis easily trumped them. They also have a ton of skills. That Aurora lady had nearly 15 skills. That's like 3 times the limit of the strongest humans in H-Tray. All in all, Ray was impressed by the status windows he saw. Aurora looks like a young woman in her late 20s, and the others look like teenagers. Their level difference is like night and day, as it should be. If they were actually good people and Esm went with them, then it's possible that they could help her grow incredibly strong. All of that was lost now, but it was by no means their fault. And now? Ray glanced at Esm, whose eyes were on the landscape below them. Once he gave her his attention, however, she looked at him and tilted her head to the side in curiosity. "What's wrong? Is there something on my face?" she asked. He shook his head. "Oh? Whew." She heaved in relief. "So what's up?" After flying for quite the distance, Ray felt like it was time to ask the difficult question that had been on his mind for quite some time. "Where do you plan on going now?" Esm didn't look surprised once she heard the question. She must have been expecting him to ask it eventually. "I'm not sure," she answered, her white hair flowing behind her like a river. "I'm sure I'll think of something." Ray had somehow predicted his answer. He already knew it was coming, and yet, he wasn't satisfied with it. His silence spoke volumes, but it wasn't enough. He clenched his fist and gritted his teeth as he stared intensely at Esm. "Don't leave." Ray ceased his motion and instantly paused in the air. Not long after, Esm also did the same. She looked at him with surprise as he stared hard into her eyes. "I don't want you to leave." Ray knew he sounded like a brat. He knew Esm was her own individual, and as such, had her own life to live. He knew they hadn't really known each other for very long, and their friendship was still too young for him to make such a request of her. She didn't even know what he looked like. Yet. Ray couldn't help his selfishness. "Where will I stay?" "The Reaper Group." "There's really nothing waiting for me there." Ray knew that very well. I am the leader of the Reaper Group. Staying with the Reaper Group means staying with me." His voice trembled as he uttered those words. He had never been so scared to open his mouth and speak in his life, yet somehow he found the courage to tell Esm what he truly felt. Perhaps it was because he recognized that he could lose her forever if he didn't. That fear gave him strength. "Stay with me, Esm. I want you to. Stay with me, even if just for a bit longer. I want us to talk together, laugh together, grow together, fight together. Even if it's just for a while longer." Ray was in love with Alicia, but he never had a friend like Esm before. He didn't want to see their friendship dissolve so quickly, not when it was just starting. "Don't leave me too." He cast his gaze downward, unable to look Esm in the eye. Was he being manipulative? Was he trying to guilt-trip her by appealing to her emotions so she would have no choice but to stay with him? Esm was a kind person, so maybe she could pity him and remain by his side. Ray didn't want that for her. He didn't want to force his selfishness on someone else. For all he knew, all of these rabid feelings that threatened to consume him were only one-sided. How can I live with myself, knowing I forced her to stay? Despite his strong inclination to hold on, he knew that something had to be forfeit. Perhaps he just had to let go. I'm sorry for. Whoosh. Like a blur, Esm's body rushed to Ray's, and she hugged him very tightly. What are you apologizing for, you jerk? Ray felt paralyzed, unable to move in the slightest. All he could do was inhale the sweet aroma that Esm exuded, allowing the tears in his moist eyes to dry up and his trembling lips to part wide open. I also don't want you to leave me. Esm's words caused Ray's eyes to widen. He had never heard those words in his life. All of his friends. They left him at one point or the other. Billy betrayed him. Noah abandoned him. Even Alicia wanted to leave this world that he loved so much and return to Earth. He didn't despise any of these people, and to an extent, he understood why they made the choices that they made. But Ray was human too. He wanted connections that wouldn't expire. He desired a bond that would last. He craved someone who would stay. And right now, he was trapped in her embrace. Asterisk. 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 Thanks for reading. Now, even I wonder what will happen next. Alicia or Esm, please comment your choices so I can at least understand the perspective of the readers. Chapter 393, Premonition for What Is to Come. Ugh. Aurora felt a sharp sensation in her head as she woke up in a flowery expanse. The place was lit by firefly-like sources of light that floated all around a garden that seemed to exist in a cave. We're back here. Aurora's thoughts trailed as she looked around. She could see her sisters still asleep. There were 12 of them in total. What happened back then? What did the humans do? My memory is fuzzy. The last thing she remembered was the exchange of goods with the humans, and then they went their separate ways. Did we get attacked on our way back? Was it a dragon? No, if that was the case, they would already be dead. Besides, Aurora still had the pouch which contained the spatial rings in her possession. All the items were secure, and her 12 sisters were safe. A dragon would not show that sort of mercy. This place is accursed. We shouldn't have come here, to begin with. Aurora chastised herself as she rose to her feet. Still, they had no choice thanks to their desperation. Now that we have received these items, we can return to our home. Aurora stole one final glance at her sisters and felt a surge of bliss. It had been a long, arduous, and frustrating journey, but they were finally done with their mission. A subtle feeling within her told her she was forgetting something, but Aurora could hardly notice it. Not while her heart raced and she remembered the sisters who were busy fighting against the scourge of the world. Wait for me, everyone. Aurora clenched her fist in resolve and smiled with sheer determination. I'm coming back. The other worlders were busy in their living quarters, all of them enjoying their time off by either moping around or engaging in interesting conversations. Even Adonis, the training-obsessed one, was taking a break. He also urged Trisha and Billy to take the day off. As a result, all 9 of the other worlders were in their residence when a knock came from the door. Naturally, everyone's attention was drawn to it. Before long, the door was opened and the Royal Council members entered in their majesty. Surprise was plain on the faces of the students as they watched the two enter their living quarters. After all, they had all been informed that there would be no official business for at least a few days. They were to enjoy their time as they saw fit. Seeing the sources of official business enter the room, they felt a bit tense. Unfortunately, their concerns were valid. The Royal Council came to visit for an ominous reason, after all. Could you all gather around, please? We have a very serious announcement to make. Vita spoke up first. Somehow, hearing her nice voice set up a somewhat friendly atmosphere in the living room. The students who were in theater rooms were called for, so before long all 9 other worlders were in the same living room. There were a few murmurs, but most of them were silent. They looked at the counselors with curiosity and tense expectations. Somehow, most of them already had a good guess of what this meeting was all about. Without a doubt, it was related to the very reason they were summoned in the first place. We are here to inform you that we have finally received a response from the front lines of the battle. Luciel and Brutus will be arriving in about 10 days to fetch you all for your confrontation with the dragons. Conrad spoke up. He tried his best to be calm and warm in his voice, but even if he did so, it didn't take away the heavy meaning that his words implied. The time for war was near. It didn't matter that they had spent the last 3 months preparing for this moment. The mere fact that it had come was enough to cause most of the other worlders to shudder. There was fear. Anxiety was written on the faces of everyone present. However, this was only temporary. Once they overcame the initial apprehension, most of the students leaked out a smile. A certain glow could be seen in their eyes. It betrayed the initial apprehension from before. Their gaze transcended mere excitement or anticipation. It was sheer exhilaration. They seemed to be saying with their faces, "I can't wait." In 10 days, you say. Adonis raised his hand, causing everyone to look in his direction. And what should we be doing before then? Claudius leaked a sigh of relief as he heard those words, so Vita took it as her cue to respond to the hero's question. You can do whatever you like pending that time. Consider it as a little vacation before the main work. The students understood this well, and so they nodded at each other. Once again, we would like to thank you all. Brave champions like you, visitors from another world, who have chosen to remain here in order to save us. Claudius bowed his head before them. Vita did the same with a bright smile on her face. You have all grown so much stronger in such a short span of time. Your power is unrivaled among we humans, and your potential for growth never seems to end. In this awe-inspiring moment, the other worlders showed the courtesy of silence as they watched the counselors appreciate them with all their hearts. For all you have done and are about to do. Thank you. In the barren lands, west of the adventurer's city directly in its outskirts, a rumbling sound echoed. The capable men who guarded the city's borders, and the patrol officers who just happened to be walking nearby at that exact moment, experienced the amazing thing that occurred. The wasteland, which occupied everything in the south as far as the eyes could see, was trembling violently. The sands parted, giving way to something. Something beyond normal. Emerging from the deserted land was an ominous building, one so black that it far surpassed the gift of the night. Strange energies poured out of this colossal establishment, and moments after it rose from the earth, the rumblings ceased. Everything went silent, and the wasteland entered a lull. It was as if nothing had even happened. Other than the massive dark structure that stood in the distance, nothing else changed. Every guards and patrol officer present stared at all of this happening, their eyes wide and sweat dripping down their faces. They all thought the same thing. It's a dungeon. For the first time in about a century, a new dungeon had appeared within the Western continent. This was an amazing discovery, one worth celebrating. However, just as a dungeons was known to bring great prosperity, it was also terrible omen. A harbinger for the great tragedy to come. And this particular dungeon was no exception. For within 10 days after its emergence, a great evil would befall the United Human Alliance. It would be forever known as the Grand Calamity Dungeon. Asterisk. 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 Prepare yourselves for Arc 4. P.S. Hope you enjoyed the mass release. Chapter 394, World of the Lost. Death. The world was covered in the stench of it. No matter where you looked, there would always be a dead body, a gaping corpse whose wretched form stared back at you. The skies seemed to be shrouded in an eternal night, and a nonsensical mix of freezing heat pervaded everything. Chaos was rampant. Destruction became trite. Humanity, after fighting the long war for 15 straight years, was finally on the brink of extinction. In this despairing world, 3 silhouettes sped across the devastated battlefield. They trampled on the bodies of their fallen comrades, their feet splashing around the blood of the dismembered corpses around them. Despite such obvious desecration, they didn't seem to care. Their goal, the Chamber of the Ancients, was far too valuable for any kind of hesitation in their march. Also, they were in a bit of a hurry. Whoosh! Like the very personification of wind, they flowed through the area, ensuring they could reach their goal in time. And, by some absurd miracle, they did. The Chamber of the Ancients, a dome-like structure that existed at the furthest ends of the domain they existed in, accepted their entry. The 3 were able to get in, just in time for the solstice to begin. The celestial solstice that took place once every 100 years, the short window that caused the veils of reality to thin out considerably, creating the perfect chance for a miracle. The 3 silhouettes were bathed in the light that shone from within the dome, revealing their true identities. There was a white-haired mage, immensely beautiful, with crimson eyes and several charms placed all over her enchanting body. Her mage attire had many torn all over, a sign of the dreary experience she had to endure in the war. Her hair was cut short, but she still had the same bright smile as the first day 5 years ago when the first miracle of mankind happened. "Lucielle, we're finally here." "What now?" The voice of the second man rang with boldness and readiness. There was a hint of pain in his tone, but he hid it all in the bravado he displayed. He had black hair and dark brown eyes. He was of average looks, but his well-built body and incredibly long blade were far from average. In the past, his hair was of natural length, but it had now grown long due to being unkempt for a long period. It used to be packed together, but their journey to this dome was by no means a smooth one. As a result, his long hair roughly covered his face, and by extension, the scar on his left eye. A mark he received in order to save the life of the comrade next to him. "Patience, Ray. We just got here," Lucielle mumbled as she began to look around the dome's interior. Of course, Ray knew that Lucielle was busy observing the runic language that covered the walls of their surroundings, matching it to what they had learned over the past year. The oracle's words rang true, so that meant the power they sought was also present. The power to change everything. "I think what we have to do lies over there. With that magic circle." Lucielle pointed forward, towards an altar. There existed flaming torches that surrounded the stage, and rune-like depictions warbled as if they could go off at any given moment. "You think?" Ray responded, raising one of his brows. The 3 in the room rushed towards the altar, and Lucielle observed it some more. "Based on what I'm seeing here, I'll have to augment the magic circle in order to suit our purposes." Lucielle rubbed her chin as she spoke. "So, you can control how far back we can go?" "No, not really. The further back, the more time and energy will be required to activate. Plus, remember what I've been warning against." Yeah, the butterfly effect." "Butterfly? It's the dragonfly effect, though." In our old world, it's called the butterfly effect. Same difference. This exchange by both parties was observed by the third member of the trio. He silently watched everything, unable to contribute even a word to the conversation. He had an oddly cut yellow hair, his very lean appearance, and his face could be defined with one word: ugly. He was unsightly in appearance, so he often bowed his head to hide his full face from anyone who was in his presence. In any case, we can't afford to make too many big changes since it'll derail the events that'll happen even more. Lucielle sighed, her eyes still on the runes in the magic circle. She had to understand everything about them, their arrangements, formation, up to the tiniest details, or else there could be a fatal error. So, your point is that we don't make changes? No. If we desire to change this outcome, we need to make changes. We just can't make significant ones except at given points in time, so we can predict exactly what happens and how to best respond to them. Altering the future, or should I say, this present, by going to the past. That in itself will make changes that are significant. I suppose it is unavoidable. Lucielle muttered, finally rising from her crouched position. That's what I've been trying to say. Ray responded with a sigh. Well, we'll figure it out as we go. For now, it's best we get started. Lucielle smiled. She grabbed the hands of the lanky blonde and pulled him over to her side. Come on, Adonis. Let's get to work. Lucille's smile caused the boy to beam, and Ray watched this exchange with a sad smile on his face. Your master and disciple relationship makes me a bit teary, you know. His chuckle rang hollow as he strained a genuine smile. Makes me wish my own master was still around. For a moment, there was silence. Then, Brutus' sacrifice won't be forgotten. He made the right choice. If he didn't do what he did, we wouldn't be here. I know. I get it. Ray sighed at Lucille's words. It's not just him. Everyone's sacrifice has brought us to this point. All three stared and nodded at each other. To this place. Ray tightly gripped his tall and broad sword, his master's final gift to him, and made a smile oozing with nostalgia. Brutus called it his late present to Ray for finally surpassing him and reaching the realm of the absolute. He had become an absolute Night King. Looks like all of that is about to be reset, though. He chuckled as he made the joke. Ray turned and smiled at Adonis in particular, whose face was so gloomy that it contrasted the other two in the room. Don't look so gloomy, my friend. We're going to change everything. And then, those words became a blur. The world became distorted, and the dream that was once so vivid turned dark. Dark and red. The dreamer slowly opened his eyes in his room, and tears streamed down his handsome face as he placed his hand on it. You were right, my friend. Adonis muttered, his voice barely able to come out as a result of the choking emotions. Everything is changing. Asterisk. 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 Sacrifices will be made, and so many things will change within these 10 days. Prepare for the most pivotal point of the story yet. Who will die? Who will live? Let's find out together, shall we? Chapter 395, The Dungeon Notice. The royal estate's open field, which was empty just yesterday, was packed to the brim with all the 9 other worlders. Well, 8 of them, since Adonis went to meet the royal council after making the announcement that all of them should all rendezvous at this point in time. As such, the students all waited for any sign of the hero and the leaders of the alliance. What's going on now? Why's there another meeting when we just had one yesterday? I'm supposed to be chilling in the town today, you know. Hopefully, This doesn't take too long. Thankfully, the latter's statement was answered by the appearance of the royal council members and Adonis from within a swirling portal. Everyone instantly recognized the portal, so they kept their eyes peeled on its entrance, but the spatial rift just closed as abruptly as it opened. There was no sign of the dark adventurer at all. The students all responded with surprise, seeing only 3 rather than 4 to emerge from the warped space. We just concluded a meeting with Sir Relix, but he had to quickly attend to something so he couldn't stop by. Adonis quickly addressed the voices of the students, but it wasn't enough. And not even to say hi. Belle's face was particularly crestfallen. Well. He does send his regards. Adonis quickly added, hoping it would help lighten up the mood. Thankfully, it did. I see. I understand now. Belle's blushing face connoted that she misunderstood Adonis' words, but he had no intention of correcting her. Instead, he left the girl to her giggles and squeals, focusing on the most pertinent matter. Sir Conrad and Miss Vita have important things to say, so I'll leave it to them. Despite saying this, Adonis did not join the rest of the students, most of which were already seated in the open field. Instead, he took responsibility as one of the people who had to make the decision that was about to be revealed. His face was solemn, but it oozed of confidence. Please listen to them attentively. Participation is optional, but it would be for the best if you hear us out first. As expected, the hearts of everyone softened, and they hearkened to their leader's voice. Then, the counselors took the stage. Just yesterday, we received news of something unexpected. It hasn't happened in over a century now. Conrad began. He could see the tense, but attentive faces of the students. That gave him the strength to continue. A new dungeon has appeared in the Adventurer's City. Not just any kind of dungeon, but the adventurers have labeled it as a Grand Calamity class dungeon. The highest class a dungeon can have. Adventurers had a different lingua to explain certain phenomena and concepts. They labeled their ranks, missions, and even places. This presented as close to accurate a representation as one could get. If a dungeon was labeled as a Grand Calamity class, that meant only one thing: it was impossible to clear. The first Grand Calamity class dungeon appeared about 300 years ago, and nearly half of the adventurers were wiped out in the dungeon raid. That was when the infamous name was coined. Vita added, emphasizing the dangers of this dungeon. So how was the dungeon cleared? A random, but pertinent question, rose from the audience. Several positive murmurs and nods of agreement were directed at the one who raised the question, Alicia White. It wasn't cleared. Once Vita said this, shocked expressions filled the faces of the otherworlders. Just as suddenly as it appeared, claiming the lives of half the population of adventurers within the span of a week, it vanished just like that. A week? Well, more like 10 days. That's a small amount of time. Strange too. Alicia murmured while placing her hand on her chin to think. Vita nodded and smiled wryly. Indeed. We have no proper explanation for it, but there have been cases of dungeons disappearing into thin air. That shouldn't be too surprising, considering how they also appear out of nowhere sometimes. The otherworlders didn't know too much about dungeons. Save for a few who actually studied, but they knew this much thanks to a lot of explanation from relics during their royal dungeon raid. As a result, they could all relate to what Vita was saying. It's likely that, just the same way the Grand Calamity dungeon of the past disappeared after 10 days, this one will also do the same. She added. Any specific reason for that? Alicia asked. None whatsoever. However, it's only logical to expect similar results from similar objects of investigation. It was merely an act of association. If one encounters a dragon for the first time having no prior knowledge of the beast, there tends not to be any kind of expectation towards the thing. However, after the first encounter, if one observes the violent tendencies of the creature and associates it with danger, then the next time they are to see a dragon, that bias is bound to exist. Of course, other factors could have contributed to the first dragon being dangerous, which may not exist in the second instance. For example, the first dragon could have been a terrible entity who was banished from the rest of the kind dragons. However, when associating with the second dragon, none of those variables will come to mind. The safest assumption to make is to associate dragons with danger. As such, it's safer to bet that the dungeon will act a certain way, the same way we have determined that it is very dangerous. I see. Makes sense. Alicia returned to her seat once she was done with her clarification. Hence, Vita continued. Usually, the adventurer city has a certain level of autonomy, so they do not report most of the activities that go on there to the capital. But, the appearance of a dungeon of this scale is an exception. We received a report of this yesterday night, along with something else. Conrad stepped forward to complete the words of his partner. The adventurers want to challenge the Grand Calamity Dungeon this time, and they are requesting our assistance. Asterisk. 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 Thanks for reading. Alright, we're just at the start of the arc, so you know what's coming. I'm sure some of you are already making predictions on what will happen. Well, things might not go that way. Chapter 396, The Epitome of Freedom. 300 years ago, things were very different. Human civilization was fragmented into various nations, and so there were various opposing factions with their individual self-interests at play. The only exception to this was the Adventurers Guild. Adventurers were neutral parties amongst the scuffle among nations. They weren't involved in politics, and their simple lives were unaffected by the embers of conflict spreading amongst the other nations. They were strong enough to make their own city a haven free from the rigors of nationalism and became the very embodiment of freedom. An adventurer serves no one but himself. This embodied the spirit of everyone who chose the path. As long as you obeyed the basic rules of conduct necessary for living in a civilization, there was no restriction to what you could or couldn't do. As far as their economy went, individual adventurers sold monster cores and special ores gotten from their land to the highest bidder. The guild received their cut and maintained the city in return. Jobs gotten through the guild made them entitled to more profit, but the payment and security of the job would also be guaranteed. There was more to the trade, but that was essentially it. While the ideal of freedom had a lot of benefits to the adventurers, there were some consequences to their hubris. When chaos struck, or calamity arose, the adventurers would find themselves alone. Without any affiliation to a nation, they could not opt for support or seek out aid. As a result, the adventurers were doomed to fall on their own. This was especially true when the Grand Calamity class dungeon emerged. Of the 5,099 adventurers who charged in for the raid, the dungeon conquest, only 2,900 made it out alive. A few hundred were unable to recover from their injuries and died not long after they escaped the dungeon. It was the greatest loss the adventurer city ever faced in history, even till date. They suffered a heavy blow that day. And when they requested the aid of the neighboring nations, the same nations that often used the strength of the adventurers to get rid of monsters of assist in all kinds of tasks in their respective territories, they completely ignored the adventurers' city. Perhaps they thought if the adventurers became desperate enough, they would finally succumb and sign an affiliation treaty. When that didn't happen, out of frustration, the nations decided to take what they wanted by force. The adventurers were a major threat, since they were too strong for any sole nation to handle. However, in their weakened state, they were easy prey. Or so the nations thought. The nations found out that day at the time of their invasion that they were dead wrong. The main reason why the adventurers could form a faction of their own, without any external interference, was not simply because of their collective strength. No. It was due to the power of one man. The man known as the first heroic rank adventurer. The strongest adventurer in all of history. Jet Zephyr, the Sword Saint. He single-handedly warded off the armies that charged at his beloved city. It was only thanks to Jet Zephyr that the adventurer city was spared that day. He saved them all. The dream of freedom that the brave men and women had. He was a true adventurer, an ideal that all aspired to be. Forgive my long rant, but you get the point, right? Conrad sighed, feeling a bit drained after going on and on about the complicated history of the adventurer city. The other worlders didn't know of it, so he thought he could explain it in a few words. Well, it ended up being a little more than that. So, what you're basically saying is that the adventurers hate your guts despite being an alliance. And they often act as a separate entity from you even though you're on the same side against the dragons. Eric spoke up, flexing his glasses as he did so. Yes. Precisely Tha. Let's not forget that the reason for that is because of what the nations did to them all those years ago. Clark added, interrupting Conrad. Dick move, man. Dick move. Justin nodded. Why yes. We know it was a dick move, you called it? But, a lot has changed since that time. Conrad said, finally sighing as he appeared deflated. Dealing with otherworlders was not his forte, so he shifted his gaze to the expert and pleaded for some support. Guys, it's a messy history for sure, but times have changed. Adonis stepped forward and addressed the students. I'm sure we can all think of atrocities that some nations have committed against one another back on Earth. That didn't stop the UN from forming, and for alliances to be made later in the future. In the end, letting go of the past and embracing the future was the most optimal path for progress. It seems like the higher UPS in the adventurer city can see that now. Adonis added with a smile. The contents of the discussion between the Royal Council and the adventurer city's highest authority were then spilled. The adventurers want to begin a dungeon conquest on the new Grand Calamity dungeon. What? Even after what happened before? The shock from the students was expected, so Adonis wasn't fazed. Instead, he took his time to further explain his position. There are currently 3 heroic rank adventurers and more high-ranked adventurers in the city. Their numbers are a lot more than what they had 300 years ago. They believe they have both the quality and quantity advantage. Enough to ensure the success of this conquest. Of course, this was no guarantee that they would win. However, they had the biggest chance to succeed now, more than ever before. The dungeon is assumed to close in 9 days. They want to begin the conquest as soon as possible in order to guarantee maximum results and success. Adonis paused upon seeing a hand raised. Is it really necessary to risk their lives like this? Can't they just wait for it to go away? The concerned face that Belle gave made everyone's heart melt. It was obvious how worried she was about the fine adventurers of the city. If only it was that simple. Adonis sighed. I think preserving your life is pretty simple, though. Justin added, but Adonis shook his head slightly. You should all understand by now. The rewards that a dungeon can offer to those who challenge it. No one spoke after that. They completely understood Adonis' words. Adventurers seek fortune and glory. A dungeon with the highest difficulty rank also means it has the highest reward available. Many will risk their lives just for a chance to get that. Many of the students could not relate, since they were sheltered by the royal council from day one, but such was the nature of this world. To survive and thrive, one had to risk it all. Besides, the adventurer city is not a monolith. The guild is the central hub, sure, but there are various factions in the form of parties. There is no rule stopping an adventurer from exploring a dungeon, as long as they have the qualifications necessary for such. A Grand Calamity class dungeon was not even regulated by any kind of rule, since it was an outlier. That meant anyone could venture in. There are bound to be parties who challenge the dungeon regardless of warnings. As we speak, there will already be casualties. Adonis spoke sternly. In order to reduce the amount of fatalities that will ensue as a result of this dungeon's appearance, it's better to organize a conquest where adventurers attack the dungeon en masse. And it was in this plan that the otherworlders came into play. Simply put, the higher UPS of the Adventurer Guild want us to send some of our best to help them out in this conquest in order to make it a success. Adonis continued, casting his gaze on each and every one of his comrades. They require our assistance, so after some deliberation, we decided to pitch the entire thing to you all. The otherworlders had mixed expressions on their faces, but Adonis wasn't done with his address. Like I said earlier, this is entirely optional. If you don't want to participate, then that's fine. He added. But, I would advise you to consider it, as it would not only help out the adventurers, but also each and every one of us once we reach the front lines. What do you mean by that? Alicia asked. Adonis smiled upon hearing this. We won't be in the same unit in the battlefield, just as we won't be in the same party if we accept the request of the Adventurer City. In essence, this could be regarded as their final training before the real thing 10 days from now. So, what do you say, everyone? Asterisk. 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 Thanks for reading. This chapter was longer than usual, and it had a lot of info dumps, but I hope you enjoyed it regardless. Chapter 397, Unanimous Agreement. A battlefield is chaos. It is a wide layout of destruction. And as such, it requires capable soldiers spread out in the canvas of carnage in order for it to be called a battle. Different brigades are led by competent leaders, and they handle various battle positions while properly sticking to the established formation. Every role is important, and is required to remain firm from the vanguard, to the flanks, to rear defenses and support, else, failure is certain. That is the nature of war. We won't be together? For real? Justin's voice echoed among the students as he raised his brows and voice in shock. You didn't know that? I figured it out pretty early. Eric sighed as he flexed his glasses. To him, all of this was just common sense. Anyone could see why the otherworlders couldn't just be one elite force when the front lines had various areas that required attention. Plus, otherworlders weren't invincible as well. The dragons were a lot, and they were just 9. In order to win, just like they learned in the dungeon, they required a functional strategy. You already knew, Eric? Justin asked with widened eyes. Yeah. It was obvious. I sort of figured it out too. Yeah. Me too. It turned out most of the otherworlders had at least an inkling of suspicion about the nature of their dispatchment. This had to be because they thought very critically about the battlefield and what they would be doing there. And, well, thinking wasn't just in strongest suit. In any case, everyone, let's get back to topic. Adonis drew the attention of the students back to himself, and he folded his arms as he looked at them seriously. If we take on this mission, we can use the last days preparing for the battlefield rather than just having fun and getting rusty. I understand the temptation to take a break, especially after all we've been through. I also understand if anyone wants to remain in the royal estate, but I really think this is a good opportunity for us. The fact that Adonis emphasized this point made it all the more curious. We'll register as adventurers and join different parties. Our identities as otherworlders from the capital will also be kept a secret. If some found out about it, it could lead to some unsavory results. Not all adventurers had forgotten the past. In fact, it was safe to say that most still clung to it, and would never respect any established government. In that vein, it was of utmost pertinence, as important as it was to succeed in the conquest, to keep the deal a secret. So, who's in? The otherworlders looked at each other, one by one, trying to gauge on another's response. Unlike in the past, this choice had no major consequence. Even though some chose to remain back, some could still go for the mission. In the same vein, everyone could choose to accept or reject the mission. For a moment, tense silence pervaded everywhere. The students seemed to be waiting for something, or at least, someone to break the inevitable decorum. Then, I am in. The voice of someone from behind echoed, causing everyone to look in his direction. It was Ray Schuyler. I don't want to be left behind. The EXP and experience everyone will gain in the conquest will be lost to me if I don't go. To better myself and not be a burden, I would like to participate. Once he gave his reasons and shared his resolve, there wasn't much silence after that. I'll go too. Me too. Count me in. He. This should be fun. I'm supposed to be resting, but okay. Why not? One after the otherworlders accepted. Alicia, Belle, Billy, Justin, Eric, Clark, Trisha, Adonis, and Ray, all of them unanimously agreed to the challenge. Conrad and Vita watched the sight with even more relief in their hearts. Seeing how Adonis always managed to succinctly explain the situation, and convince everyone to follow him, these two adults couldn't help but be envious. The hero had everyone's trust. It was a wonderful sight to see, regardless. What an interesting development. Ray smiled internally. He had been planning on visiting the Adventurer City one way or the other during the break, since he planned on getting stronger before the deployment. But he never imagined such a unique opportunity would pop up. Of course, this wasn't the first time he was hearing the news. That would be moments ago, when Adonis and the Royal Council called for him about a pertinent issue. He had left a communication device that they could use to contact him in their possession, so he got their call and headed there immediately. To think things would turn out this way. So, how bad is it? Relix sat opposite the trio, having only an elaborate table to separate their equally prestigious and comfortable sofas. His question remained in the air for a few moments before receiving an answer. The situation isn't too bad yet, but it is projected to become uncontrollable. The Grand Calamity class dungeon itself isn't the issue, but the adventurers. About 100 have already ventured in, based on what we last heard, and there has been no word from them. As Conrad spoke, his face became crestfallen. Adonis suggested we deploy the students as backup, but we would like to get your input as the one who observed them throughout the raid. Do you think they're ready to take on such a challenge? Relix chuckled almost instantly once the question was posed to him. His arms were folded, but his body shook gently as he stifled his laughter. Such a needless question. He replied, his tone still containing hints of amusement. All 9 of them exceed even the most powerful adventurer. Adonis smiled and nodded, a spark in his eyes. It seemed he was in agreement with all that Relix said. I can guarantee it. Asterisk. 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 Thanks for reading. What rank do you think the evolved royal dungeon will be according to the adventurer scale?